Everyone, welcome to the Life's Worth Living podcast. I'm your host, John Gossett. Welcome back for another week of the podcast. The sponsor of the podcast is GTM Builders. We're recording in their model home in Overlake. If you're thinking about building a new home, reach out to GTM Builders. They're great people, build a beautiful home, and you can visit one of their 4 model homes or visit them online at gtmbuilders.com. Tonight's episode is brought to you by A. Warner Homes Real Estate. If you're thinking about buying or selling, reach out to A. Warner Homes Real Estate. They will take special care of you, and you can reach out to them at 801-867-5078 and mention that you heard about it on this podcast. If you're a veteran or a first responder, they're going to cover the cost of your appraisal and your home inspection. So appreciate them. They make this podcast possible. But tonight, I'm really excited. We're going to do it via Zoom tonight because I've got a friend of mine, Michelle Anhang from Toronto, Canada. How are you doing, Michelle?
I'm great. So happy to be here.
Well, I'll tell you what, how's the weather up there? We're getting a little rain tonight, little sprinkles.
A little windy, but pretty warm. So no complaints.
Nice. Well, I'm so grateful you're able to find a time to meet with me on this podcast and kind of talk about your story. You and I have talked and visited, and I think this will be the first episode of my podcast where we really start to kind of dig into mental health. And so I really appreciate you being, vulnerable and willing to visit with me about that, because I think your story is, one that so many people could learn from, and help take away the shame of mental illness and things that as humans we should be okay with and should feel fine about talking about. So tell us a little bit about you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Tell the listeners a little bit about your life growing up, and then we'll kind of get into your story.
Sure. So my life growing up, well, born and raised here in Toronto, Canada, and came from a pretty strict household, and, in a small community, and met my husband actually when we were 8 years old, just through a community youth group, and started dating when we were 18. Got married at 22, ripe old age of 22, and had 2 sons who are now 21 and 18. And everything seemed great. We seemed like the picture perfect family on the outside, but few years in, I'd say about 5 years in, probably after my first son was born, my husband started experiencing some symptoms of mental illness. I think they were still kind of few and far between at the time, a little bit too soon to recognize what was going on. But, his behavior started changing, and, he wasn't quite his happy-go-lucky self. He was, such a warm and caring guy. He was the guy that, he was very handy, and none of our friends were. And he was the guy that, if somebody needed something fixed or moved or whatever, he was your man, and always helping everyone else. But he kind of went through a bit of a shift, and, started going a bit downhill from there. I was working, from the time that we were married, and 22. Started my first job actually pretty much out of university because we were young, and now suddenly we've got to support ourselves, and then the young family that came along. I was working in law for a period of time, then working in finance. And, I guess, about how many years after that? I guess about 3-4 years after that, my husband finally got a diagnosis.
So when you mentioned that you were seeing signs, he was kind of going downhill, talk a little bit about what you were seeing. I mean, kind of delve into those. What were the things that you were noticing at the beginning?
Yeah, so it was just, odd things, things that just seemed really out of character. Like I said, he was a really warm guy, really friendly, really helpful. And then, he'd kind of, maybe get angry, which he never, ever did before. And, nothing out of, blown up. But for a guy who never showed that before, suddenly, he's a lot more tense, not himself, just strange odd things that kind of like as a one-off it's like that was weird, but then as they start happening, and I think that was a piece of it too, because eventually he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I think the mood swings, and the erratic behavior, now in hindsight I can see, oh, okay, that was it for showing itself. Or just not being motivated, being really tired, being staying in bed a lot, and of course not knowing, because I didn't have any experience with mental illness. I didn't know to look out for it. He was actually adopted, so it's not like often it's in the family, and so you kind of have a bit of a heads up if somebody's talking about what's going on. But I had nothing to really refer to know that this was a sign. I also was taking care of, well, one baby, and then 2 years later, 2.5 years later, the next baby. So I had my yes, my hands were full, and so it was just kind of like, what's going on with you? Get out of bed, like help me out. I can, and I feel like it could have been having the kids that kind of might have set that up, because it seemed like the timing was really close. And part of me thinks, and of course it's just speculation, but I feel like he was kind of keeping it all together, or trying to keep it all together, when it was just the two of us, knowing that I can take care of myself. Suddenly a baby comes in and it's like, you have to care for this child.
Yeah.
And I think that might have started challenging him a bit, because that's really when we started to see that, like, things were shifting and really moving downhill. And then had the second baby, because again, like, they the episodes were so few and far between that it was really hard to put a picture together. And so yeah, two babies later, but then it started getting worse, and it was mostly the depression that was really taking hold for him. Just not able to get out of bed, tired a lot, the mindset, like, really down, feeling hopeless. And, it just, but it was hard too, because here we are with a young family, no one's getting any sleep. We're, struggling financially, as many young families do. So, we had a lot of weight on us of, it was challenging. So it was so hard to recognize that. And I had a conversation with somebody else recently, and they said to me, like, do you feel that you were too close? And it was like, yes, that's exactly it. Like, sometimes you're just so close you don't see it, because it's happening right in front of you. It's like when our kids are growing up and we see them every day, we don't see the growth happening, but somebody that doesn't see them for a few months is like, wow, they've grown. So I feel like it was very similar like that. Like, we were just kind of in our day-to-day, and sometimes he was present and himself, and sometimes he just wasn't. Yes, go
So
ahead.
did you have a conversation with him and say, hey, I'm noticing you're acting this way, what's going on? Anything to kind of try to figure out where it's coming from? Or
Yeah, but I think by the time we had that conversation, and it was like, you need to get some help, because he really wasn't doing well. That's when he did have the diagnosis. But unfortunately, once he had the diagnosis, it was kind of, like, okay, this is what it is. And now he allowed it. I know he fought it. He didn't want to burden me with it. He also felt quite ashamed. He had his own shame about it, of, feeling like he wasn't a man and supporting his family. And, wanting to be there for us. And so he was really trying to keep it in until he had the diagnosis. And then, for him, it was kind of permission to like, okay, now can I just stay in bed and be depressed? And he did. But, for those who know about mental illness, you get the diagnosis and then you do trials of medication. Because they, as his doctor put it, he said, it's not like we can just open the brain and say, the chemical imbalances are with this and this. And so you need this dosage of this and, possibly that one. It's all trial and error, cocktails, different things, different side effects. And so that was a bit of a rough journey as well, because certain medications like that would combat, say, depression, like a very common one, Prozac, that works for many people. He actually had an adverse reaction and it made him really angry. And so, he'd just be angry all the time. And I remember one time where like we both came down with this horrible flu and, we had, again, the little ones. And, I remember he was sleeping and I let him sleep all day. He had a fever. I had a fever. And then finally woke up and I was just like, here, I need you to take the kids. And he just started screaming. He's like, can't you see I'm sick? And he just like punched a hole in the wall. It was like, whoa, hey, but, and I started crying. I'm like, I'm sick too. I have a fever too, and I didn't realize like, oh my gosh, something's up here, but then he went and told his doctor about this and he's like, oh no, we got to take you off that right away. So, they kept trying different things.
And it's too bad it's not a one size fits all,
Yeah, really.
Oh, you're suffering with bipolar disorder. Let's do this, but like you said, it's try it,
right?
If it works, and move on. And that can go on for months.
Yes, and it did. Yeah. And he also was diagnosed with a form of schizophrenia. I think it's called Schizoaffective Disorder, which is essentially, in addition to the mood swings, between the manic episodes and the depressive episodes, he was also hearing voices, which I didn't know about for a long time. Actually, he didn't even tell me that was happening. Until shortly before his death. But essentially he's going through these trials. We don't know up from down. He stopped working. He went on disability leave because he couldn't, function during the day, to work for the day. So here I was with the kids, working 2 jobs now. I was working my office job in law during the day and then doing freelance work for lawyers. I was doing back in the day when we had dictaphones and, doing dictation, I was doing that in the evenings to make extra money because he couldn't work.
What did he do for a living?
He was a security alarm installer.
Okay.
So he did commercial stuff. So a lot of very technical work, but when you're not in a good headspace, you just can't do it. And there were long hours. He loved the work when he was healthy, but the long hours, the challenges, his own inner battle, he couldn't maintain all of it. Sure. And about 2.5 years after the diagnosis, while he was still, trying all the different cocktails, they're increasing the doses. Then, there's all the severe side effects that they have, weight gain and not being able to sleep and then not being able to stay awake. So he's getting all these different medications for all the side effects. So essentially he lost hope. He gave up because he wasn't getting any better. And sadly he died by suicide about a month and a half after his 35th birthday.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
So how did, one thing we didn't talk about, and I'm kind of curious about before you move on, is how did it affect his ability to be a father?
Yeah.
I kind of get how it was being, affecting his relationship with you, but how did it affect the boys and him?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's interesting because we were hiding it from the kids. And that was the thing too. Like, he didn't want anyone to know he wasn't working. The immediate family knew, a few close friends knew, but, he felt like he wasn't, himself, and he didn't want anybody to know about it. And so, we weren't telling the kids anything either. So essentially it was daddy works really hard. And so when he was home in bed for days at a time, it's like daddy's really tired because he works so hard. And when he would have manic episodes and wouldn't be home, it's, well, daddy works really hard. He's out working, and that's why you're not seeing him. So it was a bit of a blessing that they were as little as they were. When he passed, they were 7 and 4. So they didn't really have a sense, and we did a good job of glossing over things, and but it was sad because I remember after he passed, my kids did a group therapy where it was kind of art therapy and what they play therapy, and they made these memory boxes and they put notes into it and like memories. And one of the notes that my older son had put in was, my daddy loves to take naps, which was so heartbreaking because he just thought, oh, that's a part of my dad. But, for me, it was like, oh, that was the depression. But, they loved going in and jumping on him and jumping on the bed, and they were clueless. And, he was such a loving dad. When he was able to, he was the guy that was, on the floor rolling around with them and doing all the stuff that I was never that kind of parent. I was like, no, let's clean it up and keep the place neat. And he was just like, now let's make a mess. So,
how old were you when he passed?
I was 34.
34.
Yeah. Pretty young.
That is. Nobody wants to go through that, but yeah, that was.
Yeah.
You were married young, so you were married for what, 12 years?
12 years, yeah, together for 16.
Wow.
So yeah, he was all I knew. He was part of my identity that, I didn't know how to be without him.
So how did that affect you after losing him? Tell me how that hit home for you.
So in many ways, I mean, the biggest one was, telling the family that he was gone. And, again, I grew up in this family where you don't talk about this stuff. His family also, you don't talk about that stuff. And so I don't think, even though they saw what was going on and they knew he wasn't working, I don't think they really clicked into what was really going on with him. Because of course, anytime he went to visit his parents, he's, happy and doing his thing. He was great at faking it. We both were. But yeah, when the family was gathering after he passed, one of them said to me, what are we going to tell people? That was the first thought. And it was like, oh, I don't know. And then, from this place of shame and confusion, I was just like, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't tell them the truth. And so, they said, well, why don't we just say it was an accident? It was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Because in my mind, I'm like, okay, first of all, nobody even knew he was sick. Then how does he suddenly, pass away by suicide when nobody knew any of that was, leading up to it? How do I tell my kids what happened? That was probably the hardest thing for me. I couldn't wrap my head around why this happened. Even though he had called me just before he passed. And, he wanted to tell me that he loved me. He thought in his head that this was the right thing to do for the family. He said to me, I love you, but the voices in my head are telling me to do things that I know will hurt the family, and I don't want to hurt you, and I'm not getting better. And, in his words, he said, I need to go away. And, so yeah, I didn't know how to even explain this to my kids. How do I explain this to anybody? And it just seemed easier. Okay, let's say he died in an accident, and then we don't need to deal with it. But you got to deal with it. And that was the thing. I just, I basically took all the emotions, all the shame, and just shoved it really deep down. And, had to put on this face of the shock of somebody who died by accident, and not be able to grieve a suicide, which, I don't, I think many people don't realize there are so many differences for the family and the survivors of a suicide loss than grieving, an accidental death or an illness. Like, there's always that question of, did I do enough? Did I there's a part of us, especially the close family members, that feel like if I just love them enough, I can make them happy and they'll be okay. And like, we want to fix that so much. And we just think like, if I can just make him smile today, and I remember like even just other family, like I remember one day his mom saying like, oh, he's in a good mood, this is hopeful. And it's like, yeah, and it's like, and that's the thing that like as loved ones, we're looking for those moments, and we're just somehow thinking that if we can give them that, that we can heal them. And so there's so much guilt of like, where did I go wrong? What did I not see? What did I not do, that we put on ourselves? And it took me months of therapy to, even let go of that, and I remember my therapist just saying to me, like, if somebody wants to die, they will. There is not, like, you're not God. You don't have the will to like, keep people alive or choose when they live and die. Like, if they want to die, they're going to. It's out of our hands. And it was like, that was so freeing for me, of just like, yeah, you're right, that this is not in my hands. And I know I did whatever I could to help him. Absolutely. But it took me so long. But then, then there's the secret that we're keeping, and and the shame that goes with that's still there, of just like, okay, well, if I went through this, who else is going to wonder the same thing?
Well, I think it's so common, because that's a story you hear over and over again. Like, how do you explain that?
Right.
And I think there's two parts of that. The first part is, if he died by suicide, you're trying to protect him from that shame.
Yes.
But then if there is a suicide, then what does that say about me and how I handled? And so there's both sides of that.
Yeah.
And it's not that you did anything wrong, because I think it's human nature to handle it the way you did. And he didn't want to die. He wanted the pain to end. He wanted that hope back in his life that he wasn't finding. And that was no one's fault. You did the best you could with what you'd been given. And I think that's kind of the misconception, that people do the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and
yes,
it'll tear you up.
Oh yeah, and it did. It really did. And you're so right about and the family member, like what goes on their side as well, like the twofold. It's I remembered hearing a friend of mine talking about somebody who had died by suicide. And every time she referred to them, she was like, oh, that woman whose husband died by suicide. And it was like, this person is being remembered for that one instant, like for their death. And then, and then there's a whole story that goes on in our heads around that. And I remember thinking, like, he was so much more than the moment of his death. I don't want him to be remembered for that.
Because, he lived an entire life, and that was just just this one moment, and a short moment.
Yeah. And it's like, well, why can't we say, like, he was that guy who did all these great things? No, we talk about that moment of death, and we tend to do it so much more when it comes to suicide. You don't hear it so often of like, any other kind of death. It's just like, oh, there's that woman who was widowed, or, or whose husband died, but we don't go into the story around it. So there is that element of judgment. And yes, I did want to protect him. And I just kept thinking about, wow, there were all those years of his life that, are just taken away when you then identify it as the suicide. So thank you for mentioning that piece as well.
I can't imagine what you went through. I mean, that's so difficult. And he was away when it happened. He wasn't at home. He was in New York, wasn't he?
Yeah. So what happened there was a couple of weeks earlier, he was not doing well. I mean, at this point, he had he was psychotic at this point. Had lost touch with reality, and I was worried. He was really unwell. He was kind of wandering the streets for a bit, and he had called me, so I actually had him picked up and taken to a hospital because I was worried. So ironically, I was worried that he was accidentally going to hurt himself or hurt somebody else, and. So here he was. I mean, in Canada, they call it Form 1, where you admit somebody into the hospital for psychiatric care. And it was on a Friday evening. And they called me the next day and they said, or the day after, and they said, we've got to release him. Like, he told us that he's not at risk of hurting himself or anybody else. And I was like, can you wait till Monday morning? He's got, 2.5 years of psychiatric records with his psychiatrist. Like, he's not in good shape. Can you at least wait till you speak to his doctor? And they said, sorry, we can't. And they let him out. And so he ended up then at that point deciding to go to New York. He didn't tell me. He called me, ironically. He decided to take the bus. And he called me from the bus station. I guess, I don't know if it was Greyhound or whatever it was. And he called me from the station. I could hear the overhead, the announcements. And I was like, where are you? And he was like, oh, no, I'm just in the grocery store. And they're just calling for, clean up on aisle 6 or whatever it was, made the excuse. And I believed him. And then he called me a few hours later and he was like, listen, I want you to know I just crossed the border. I'm going to New York. He had an old friend from high school there. And he said, I just want to go and see him for a few days. And I was like, okay, that could be good for him. And, we talked every day. And even the night before he was scheduled to come home, he said to me, the plan was that, I would go and pick him up and then we would take him to the hospital together and he would voluntarily admit himself. Unfortunately, the next morning came and he called me and I said, why aren't you on your way home? And he said, well, I'm not coming back. And that's when it happened. So, yeah, I think he knew. And that was part of, going back to what my therapist had said, I think, he knew that I would stop him if I had the opportunity. But if he left the country, it was out of my hands.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So he was determined. And later on when everybody's expressing their condolences, it was very interesting because people, from all different times of his life, old school friends and different people, who were paying their condolences were saying to me, it was so weird because he reached out to me a few weeks ago, just out of the blue to say hi, and then I was like, oh my gosh, he was planning this. These were all his goodbyes. He was literally going through an inventory of all the people he cared about in his life and checking in with them, and that was, but of course, I can't say anything because this is an accident and they're thinking, wow, what a coincidence. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, they're not putting two and two together, but you've got it.
But I am. I'm sitting there going, oh, holy cow, and I can't even say anything. So yeah, it was just not good.
Well, and I think that when it goes that way, where you're trying to keep this under wraps and not let people know, it prevents you from grieving the proper way.
Oh yeah.
And being able to heal yourself. So do you feel that prolonged your healing?
Oh, 100%. I couldn't talk about all those other emotions of, there was definitely, anger, because it's like, oh my gosh, it's funny. My best friend just reminded me of this a few weeks ago. She said, I remember when you said to me, he gets to rest in peace now, and I've got to clean up this mess. Because we were, it was a financial mess that, I only found out a lot of it after he passed. But when he was in his manic states, he was spending more than we had. Now I've got to raise the kids on my own. Now I've got to deal with this secret that I'm carrying, so all this burden. And so I was angry. I was like, you're off the hook now, and I've got to deal with all this and I'm not ready for this. He was supposed to be my partner in doing all this and I felt abandoned.
Yeah.
So, that was definitely a part of it. And, but I couldn't talk about it with anybody. Like I couldn't openly grieve it. I mean, I spoke with, to my few close friends. I spoke to my therapist about it, but it wasn't, but then it was like, okay, now put on your makeup and, now you're going out and talking about the accident, which, of course I never went into detail about because, well, I'm not going to start making up even more stories. But essentially, just stuffing all of that down, I just started shutting down internally myself. I went through depression. I had a few episodes, and one of them was about 6 months after he passed where, initially when he passed away, I was, in this mode of, okay, I've got one chance to do it right with my kids. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of went into, I was still an autopilot. I was an autopilot before too, just to cope. And so it was just like, okay, just one foot in front of the other, just do this right. And then I eventually crashed and I got to a point where I would, get up and take my kids to school in the morning, come back home, crawl into bed till 3:45 when it was time to pick them up, get back in the car, bring them home. We'd have pizza or mac and cheese or whatever the easiest thing was to make. And then we'd all go to bed at like 7:30, 8:00. And I did that for a month. And during that time, I remember, looking up at the ceiling and just like saying to him, like, if this is a fraction of what you were experiencing, I understand why you did what you did. Because I didn't want to live either, but I also was never going to put my kids through that. Like they really kept me going. Yeah, it was like, okay, they're not going to lose both of us. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, and so you didn't discuss it with the kids, and they were fairly young, 7 and 4, right? So that's kind of a tough subject to tackle, even if it wasn't a secret. Yeah. Even if you were not saying it was an accident, that's a tough thing to discuss. So, at what age did you have that conversation with the board?
So I waited a long time. It was one of those things of it just became, my we use the term now new normal. That was really what it became. So I had the depression where I was shut down. I was isolating myself. I was just like really just barely functioning, like no emotion. I didn't let myself feel anything other than anxiety of worrying. What if somebody tells them? What if somebody finds out? What if this leaks? All the worst case scenarios. So I was living in between states of depression and anxiety. And that lasted for more than 10 years. And, because it just seemed like the longer, I always thought, okay, I'll tell them one day, but I thought it'll be when they're parents themselves and can understand why a parent, that's what I told myself. They'll understand why parents make these choices when they're parents themselves. It didn't work that way, but, I'm happy it worked the way that it did. And it just, it came to the point where I had done enough healing that I realized I don't want to carry this shame anymore. And, so much of it is not my shame. And I had already let go of my shame. So they were 18 and 15 when I told them. It was, I had a lot of support, and that's something that, I feel is so important for any of this healing work. And, anybody going through something like this is have the support of the people around you that you can lean into, and trust. I had become a coach at this point, kind of got into it through my friend and, loved the work, but was still holding on to that. But I had found this group of people who were so empathetic, so understanding, where I could slowly start opening up about my truth. Mm-hmm. And, they talk about authenticity and living the authentic life. And I was realizing how inauthentic my whole life was. I built this whole inauthentic life around this lie. It came to a point where I just said, okay, I can't hold it anymore. I had my group of people, holding space for me energetically and kind of just, there for me. And so I literally just, decided on the day, called the kids up for dinner and said, okay, I've got to share something with you about your dad that I haven't told you before. And I told them straight out, I said, I wish I had done it differently, but, this was the choice we made, and they understood. I mean, I am very blessed that they are who they are, and our relationship is what it is. But they understood. They knew that both sides of the family were very shame driven, and we kind of came from that space of, you just don't talk about certain things. Things are swept under the rug, and so they said they wished they had known earlier, but they understood why I made the choice that I did. And, we vowed from that point forward. It was like, okay, you know what? No more lies, no more stories. I told them I will answer any questions that they have. And, they had a good number. And it was interesting too, because, everyone always asks, like, did they know? Or did they have a sense of it? And they both said that they had a sense that something was off about the accident story, mostly because there were no details, but they didn't think it was suicide. So they always had a feeling, and my younger one had said that he kind of was thinking that at some point, he was like realizing, I know very little about that, and I should probably ask my mom, but something was preventing him from asking me, and so he didn't. But from that point, I shared everything that they have wanted to know. And I mean, it's been a few years, and we still have conversations every once in a while about, where something new might come up, or a new question, or just a thought or a feeling around it. But it's shifted into such an open relationship that, I'm very grateful for that. And, from that point, being a coach, I was kind of always figuring out, like, well, who do I want to work with? What's my niche, or niche, as I know that you guys say in the States. And I was never quite, figuring out what it was. And then after I shared this, it was like, these are the people that I want to work with. I want to work with families that are going through what I went through. I have this experience, and I have this knowledge, and I know what I needed at that time.
Sure. So what better way to give back than to say, hey, here's how you avoid those pitfalls that maybe I fell into by not knowing.
Yeah.
Now, when you told your boys at 15 and 18, is that when you explained about the mental illness to them? Is that when they found out as well?
Yeah.
And how did they take that news?
So I told them everything, and, it was all kind of one big, here you go. This is what he went through. So interestingly enough, my younger son, and I'll just let everyone know that he has given me permission to talk about this. And, so my younger son, a few days later, asked me to take him to the doctor. And he told me it was something about his thumb. He had hurt it and it wasn't healing properly. And then we go to the doctor's office, and I'm in the waiting room, and the doctor says, Michelle, do you mind coming in for a minute? And it's like, oh gosh, what's going on with his thumb? His thumb was fine. Turns out that was just a story. But he wanted to go see his doctor because he hadn't been feeling like himself. And he was meaning to talk to me about that before I shared about his dad. And then, and it was ironic because he actually said to me afterwards, he goes, Mom, you like sourced some serious truth energy that day, because it's like, spoken like a true son of a coach. He used the word of sourcing and energy and all of that. But he said, because I was actually lying in my bed just before dinner thinking, you know what, I'm going to go upstairs and talk to her. And he goes, and then you told us about Dad. And I was just like, whoa, I need to process this. And so he felt that was the easiest way for him to share it with me, was with the doctor, which was great. And so, yes, we ended up getting a referral to a psychiatrist to get him assessed. And it turned out that he had depression as well. And so, from this space, it was, being able to deal with it so differently. Having done all the work that I did, having all the knowledge that I had, being able to have the conversation with him of just saying, like, okay, so now that we have this diagnosis, how would you like me to be with you? And he was so clear in his answer. He just said, Mom, I want you to treat me the same way you did before I told you I wasn't feeling like myself. And I was like, okay, yeah, such clarity. And it was like, okay, thank you. And that's served me so well in the work that I do, because, so often we go into assumptions of like what our family member might need from us, with their illness. Like, we might want to fix them or make them feel better. They come and talk to us and we don't know how to be. And I say to my clients so often, I'm like, just ask them what they need. And, and it's like, oh, it's this revelation. So, but that's really like, that's my advice to anybody. If it's a friend, a family member, a coworker who shares that they, have some kind of mental health challenge, when they're sharing with you what they feel, sometimes we feel compelled to like, fix them or give them advice. We might say, oh yeah, just get out more, go exercise, change your, or we shut down because we don't know what to do. And so my advice is that when somebody's sharing, you can just pause them for a moment and say like, okay, are you sharing this with me to just vent or talk about it? Or do you want me to help you find a solution? And I will tell you 10 out of 10 times, they will not hesitate to tell you the answer. They know it. They know what they need. You don't need to guess. And that's the beauty of it. So yeah, I have brought a lot of wisdom from my son and from, things I've learned from doing things the wrong way, that I bring into my practice now, when I'm supporting people of just, there are ways that we can do things, to take care of ourselves and to better, love our family members. Because really that's what they want from us. They just want our love.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we all crave that connection, that human connection. Yeah. And sometimes because of mental illness, it makes it harder for them to feel that connection.
Yeah.
It makes it harder for them to feel like they're fitting in and having the same impact on others that others are having on them. And so, I mean, it's a tough deal. And, you were talking about, are you just venting or do you want me to help you find the solution? They teach us in man school. We go there. I went to man school. And in man school, they teach us, when somebody gives you a problem, it's like, here, let me fix it. And then we can quit talking about it and move on. So that is a hard thing because in suicide prevention and mental health and those types of things, you've got to just kind of, and it was something I learned in a training one time, and I've never forgot it. But the same, when you talk about listening, if you jumble up those letters, it spells silent.
Yes.
And so, sometimes you just got to zip it and let them vent. And they know the answer. They know what needs to be done, but they just need that validation. And it's healing for them to talk about it.
Yeah. And to just say it. And then, and then both of you, like it clears the air. Cause it takes so much of the guesswork out of it. Yeah. And then they feel free, like, you can kind of relax and like, okay, I can be here for you. And that's all they want. And so then it's, because I know often they may refrain from talking to us because they're like, oh, well, if I share it with them, they're just going to come up with more ideas of how to fix me or change me or how I should be doing things differently. And they don't want that. So just by listening and asking what they need, it's creates that intimacy and that permission that they can just be who they are. And you're like, okay, I'm here for you.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I host a suicide support group every month. Mm. And one thing, and to leave the anonymity where it is, but a common thing that you'll see as you go around the room, somebody will say, well, this is going wrong and this is going wrong, and kind of laying out their problems. And every other person who's struggling as well, or maybe has lost somebody, they'll say, well, what about this? Do this, do that, do that. And they shoot down every one of the ideas because they already know the answer.
Right.
And all we'd have to do is just let them spill it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's our job as the loved ones. And I say this to the family members I work with all the time. I say, you know what, as if they are seeing a professional, then you know they're in good hands, and let the professional do their job. Your job is to love them. Absolutely. And by loving them is just by giving them that space. And I loved your the play on words with the listen and silent, and I have my own I want to add. Awesome. It's an acronym, so it's WAIT, and it stands for Why Am I Talking?
Oh, gotcha. I like that.
Isn't that a good one?
That is really good. Can I spell it?
Of course, that's why I'm sharing it. Please steal it and share it. I stole it from someone else. I've got a little sticky on my monitor to remind me too, because we all, like, that's our tendency. We all go into that space, and we just need the reminder of, like, okay, just, zip it for a minute. Yep.
It's human nature.
Yeah,
it really is. Now, so tell me this. And not dwelling very much on the past, but if somebody is kind of going down the same road that you were, they're with a partner that they're feeling maybe is going through some hard times, it might be a mental health or a mental illness challenge. Looking back in hindsight, what advice would you give them as they start noticing those signs and not sure what it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what I wish I would have done was have my husband see his doctor. Just say, you know what, something feels off. Just go get checked out. I know, even if it's just the family doctor, because I know too, like, we can think it's mental illness, but there are often like vitamin deficiencies that have the same symptoms. Like, it could really be anything, and we don't know. So, but if you just say, and often, like, when you say, well, I think you might be depressed, or I think you have depression, like, the person's going to shut down.
Well, absolutely.
Because, we have the stigma around it, and nobody wants to have that label, sadly. And so there's a resistance, but just by saying, like, let's go to the doctor, and we don't know. That's the truth. We have no idea. But just going to the doctor is trained to recognize that. So yes, they will do the blood work and rule out any physical symptoms. And they can then see, like, okay, maybe I should refer you out. But they're the ones who can actually do something about it. We can't. And the other thing too is, for the family member, get support. What happened with my husband, and he passed actually just a few months before Facebook came out. So, but I say, like, while social media has many downsides, there are also a lot of good things about it. And I say, like, you can now go even just on Facebook alone and type in support for anything that you're needing, and you will find many support groups right there. Like, you don't even have to look for, like, yes, you can find your local ones, but I find that, like, pretty much everybody's on social media these days. And there is so much support out there. There is so much information available. So educate yourself and get support. Get people around you that you can trust. And I say also, like, be discerning with who you talk to, because if you know that you're sharing this with somebody who also can't deal with mental illness, or they're going to shut down over any talk of emotion, they're not the right person to talk to. But there are many people out there that are, and that are talking about this stuff, that are doing this work. Reach out to any of them, and they would be more than happy to support you, or kind of get you in the right direction. Just don't do it alone. Yeah. I did it alone. It nearly destroyed me.
Well, I think that's great advice. Now, what can we do as a community to stop the stigma of, and I've given this statistic before, and it comes from a training called Talk Saves Lives by American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. It talks about only 2 out of 5 that are suffering with a mental illness, mental health challenge, actually seek medical care. Only 2 out of 5. And so that leaves the other 3 to usually self-medicate. Yeah. And then that opens up a whole nother ball of wax. But But what can we do as a community to stop, to end the stigma and be okay to just be human and understand we're not perfect?
Yeah. So I've given talks on this actually, and I think the first step is noticing where we have our biases and where we hold our judgments.
Mm-hmm.
We go places, and I mean, it's cultural, not to put any blame, but the truth is that we do. And so, an example of, say, like we're at a party, we've got that one friend who always seems to drink a little bit more than everybody else and then starts acting out. Well, instead of sticking up your nose at them or talking about them behind their back or judging them or dismissing them, ask them how they're doing. Like, open your heart and check in with them, because people don't choose to be that way. And there's so many other situations where, it might be a mom with a bunch of kids and the kids always are all over the place. And, the mom is looking stressed and you're like, oh gosh, why can't she take better care of herself? And look at her kids, they're all running loose and wild. And, again, we go into judgment. It's like, check in with her. Like, what's going on in her life? Because again, we're not making these choices intentionally. There's often something underlying. There is some pain that somebody is either masking or not doing a very good job at masking. And so it's really up to each of us to stop for that moment when we're in judgment and just say, what give them the benefit of the doubt and just and make that connection with them, because that could change a life of just going over and saying, are you okay? I'm concerned about you. We don't know what kind of impact. And just by doing that, then we're modeling behavior for our families. We're modeling the behavior for our communities. And if each one of us does that and keeps doing that, then we're changing how we look at and deal with mental illness. And it's not about, it's not something that people need to hide anymore. They can come out and say it, I'm struggling. And our own, talking about our own struggles, if you feel okay to do that, the more of us that are talking about, I mean, again, back to social media. I mean, but that's the thing, here, we're having this conversation that would not have happened 15 years ago. There was no forum for that to happen. But now this conversation is happening so much more that we are looking at things differently, and the changes are starting to happen. But I think it's up to each one of us to take our own personal responsibility and say, how can I be part of making that change?
Well, and I think that's such a wraparound. So, you started talking about the person that drank a little bit too much at the party. Not only that, but the thing that came to mind as you were saying those things, I pictured in my head the bully at school.
Yes.
The bully at school. Hurt people, right?
Yes.
So we focus on what they've done to the other person when we really need to focus on why are they finding that forum to act out, and what can we do for the bully to figure out why are we presenting ourselves that way. And it just is a big circle where that works for almost everything that we could possibly talk about on this tonight. I really had a good question for you, and it slipped my mind because I started saying that. So tell me your husband's name.
Ellie.
Ellie?
Yes.
So if Ellie was here tonight, what would you say to him?
Make me cry. I love him. That's what I would want him to know. And I am sorry for the pain he was in. It breaks my heart now that I can see it, from this space that I'm in. I hope he's at peace now. And, I'm sorry for the pain that he was in. And, I wish things had been different, but, his boys are doing wonderfully and they take after him and in so many ways. And,
So he lives on in the boys. You see a little bit of him and them every day.
Yeah, so much. It's wild now that they're young men. It's
Isn't that
pretty
interesting how
wild.
it works?
Yeah, it really is. And we keep his memory alive. We talk about him all the time. I mean, I talk about him daily, but they'll bring him up once in a while. But yeah, he's, if it's a song that's coming on the radio, it's like, oh, that was your dad's favorite song. They know all his music, and they've got all his CDs now. Similar tastes, but yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know he's got to be looking down and so happy with how you've handled it.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm honoring him every time I speak about this, every time that I'm, every day that I'm doing the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think, it's in his honor and in his memory.
Well, and I think it's the right thing to do. He wouldn't want that to be hidden, because he wouldn't want somebody that was going through a similar situation to have it brushed under the rug or felt like it was not something that could be talked about. I'm sure he would want no one to go through the pain and suffering that he went through.
Yeah.
And let's face it, life has its moments, but I'll tell you, boy, it hands us stuff that you kind of wonder, like, why?
Yeah.
Why do we have to deal with this? And I don't know why that happens that way. And I don't know why some people seem to get it so easy and some get it so hard. And that'll be one of the questions for the big guy when we get to the other side. But
well, I could tell you that the answer I've come up with for myself, and I say, like, I don't know if it's we find meaning and this is what our purpose was, or we create it.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that finding meaning in all of this and creating a purpose out of it definitely answers the why for me. Like, I know the work that I'm doing now is so fulfilling. Like, I never could have imagined having the life that I have today, and I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing and serving the people that I'm serving now if it wasn't for what I went through. So I do have gratitude for some of that experience because of what I get to do now.
Well, and quite honestly, I think it'd be a travesty if you were handed those life's challenges, the things that you didn't want to go through, and walked away from it, kind of turning your back to it, and not taking that experience that you lived through to try to help others. And so, man, I commend you on stepping up to the plate and making that.
Thank you.
Your life purpose. I know it's not as fun as finance, but you're doing amazing things, and I appreciate your friendship and being willing to come and talk about it with me. And so tell us a little bit about what you do, how people can find you, and let's kind of get that out in the open, because you do some speaking engagements, you do your coaching.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So the speaking work I'm doing is talking about mental health and suicide, ending stigma, advocating for a new world in that area. I have my coaching practice where I specialize in working with individuals and families dealing with mental health challenges. So I talked a bit about the work that I do with the family members. Essentially, it's support and strategy. It's being the person that they can open up to, that they can talk to about whatever they're going through, the challenges, working through. Sometimes it needs to be tactical, of working out strategy of what is the direction that we're going in, and it's also a lot about the family member learning to take care of themselves. Sometimes we just get so involved in our family member's illness that we lose ourselves and we don't take care of ourselves. And I can't stress enough how, they say, like, you can't serve, when your cup's empty, and we need to fill that cup.
Yeah.
And it's not selfish, and it's understanding that, we can serve our family members best when we have taken care of ourselves. We're not depleted. We're coming from a full place. We have something to give. So it's learning to take care of ourselves, to what I call lovingly detach, which is, from maybe trying to fix or wanting things to be different and just allowing our family member to be who they are. I also work with people who have mild depression or anxiety, ADHD, different types of mental health challenges that usually are under a doctor's care, or they may, not be needing medication. But there's so often where people think like, okay, I've been given the pills, but I'm still having episodes. I'm not doing great. There's so much that we can do as individuals to empower ourselves. There are tools. I'm trained in mindfulness and meditation. That's been a huge piece of my own healing. And so I train my clients in that work as well. Teach them tools on, how to, be more mindful, recognize, when you might be having an episode, whatever that might look like, the mind-body connection, taking care of ourselves. There's so many lifestyle changes that we could make. And I know everyone taught, exercise and sleep and this and that, but I will actually work with the person to create with them a lifestyle that works for them, where they can be living healthy, pursuing what they want, because so much of that helps our mental health. And so whatever I can do to assist in that way, it's a gift. It really is. And I also offer mindfulness training for mental health. It's MTER, mindfulness training for emotional resilience. I am hoping to have another course coming up in September. So those are 4-week courses where you do mindfulness training. You learn a little bit about how the brain works and why we go through what we go through and what's happening when we're under stress, and how we can learn tools to alleviate that. So lots of different things in the mental health world. And you can find me online. My website is MichelleAnhangCoaching.com. And I'm also all over social media because I talk about it a lot. So Facebook and Instagram is also Michelle Anhang Coaching. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter a little bit, but not much. But I'm pretty easy to find if you're looking for me.
Well, that's awesome. And for those that are listening, we're being heard and I've lost track of how many countries around the world, but through COVID, we've all kind of got used to doing Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
And so, this is something you can be sitting in Salt Lake City, Utah, and connect with you for coaching and just as easy as we're having this podcast tonight. And so, there's been some real lessons we've learned through COVID and yes, it's been hard and things, but yes, it's been good. Yes. And so I think that's such a neat thing that we can connect and we don't have to be, sitting here to have this discussion.
Yeah.
Tonight. And so
it's funny because prior to COVID, nobody knew what Zoom was. I've been using Zoom for a few years already, with my clients. And it's funny because the truth is I've only got a handful of Canadian clients and the rest are around the world. So there you go. So either on the phone or Zoom, their WhatsApp is, internet phone. And so, there's so many ways that you can meet that are not in person and still really have, do great work together.
Oh, absolutely. And, when you were talking about the mindfulness training, the one thing that kept coming to mind for me was, has there ever been a busier time on this planet where I had this discussion, I think yesterday or the day before with a friend of mine, and they said, I don't remember my parents ever being as busy as I am today. It seems like with technology and work and everything, we're running. And so mindfulness is so important to be able to take that step back, have a pause for a minute, and take that time for yourself because we need that time. And so I think that's amazing. I am so appreciative of the work that you're doing. And I hope we can get back together again and talk about some different things next time. But I am so grateful for you finding an hour for me. It's a little later where you're at. So
it's all good.
I still can see the mountains and the sun going down. So I appreciate you staying up late and having this discussion with me tonight. And I feel so honored to have you share that story with me. And so thank you very much. And I want the listeners to know if you're in a deep, dark spot where you might be having these thoughts and things are concerning you, reach out for medical advice. Like Michelle said, reach out for your family doctor. If you're not feeling right, if you're having thoughts that are scaring you. The one thing that we have found is that if you've got that person that you're close enough to that you can talk about these things with, a trusted friend or someone that you care about, that you can have those discussions with, talk about it, because sometimes the talking helps. But if you don't have that person, the one thing we have is a lifeline. So reach out. That's 365 days a year, 24/7. Reach out to 1-800-273-8255 and let them know what you're going through, because they can connect you with resources that will help. And don't ever try to deal with it alone, because when we try to deal with things alone, we kind of isolate from those that we care the most about, and that makes the healing so much harder. Don't do it alone. Reach out for somebody. And I appreciate the listeners coming back one more week. I know you don't come for me, you come for these amazing guests like Michelle. And thank you for being a part of this podcast. Please share it. If you've got somebody that you think tonight's topic of mental health would help, share this podcast with them. It takes just a second to do it, and you'll be amazed that, that's what it's about. Caring about people, having empathy for each other, and sharing experiences that you felt might be important. So reach out and share this one. And again, tonight, I'd like to close up by thanking our sponsors, GTM Builders. You can find them at gtmbuilders.com or A. Warner Homes Real Estate. You can reach out to them at 801-867-5078. Boy, I about forgot that. I'm terrible. I'm getting old. But I do appreciate those sponsors, people that have stepped up in my community to say, you know what, we care about what you're talking about. We care about this subject, and we care about the people that we surround ourselves in our community. And I'm grateful for them being willing to put their name behind this podcast and be part of it with me. If you're interested in what we're doing, you can find us at Life's, LIFES, Life's Worth Living Foundation. And you can find us on all social media as well. And if you've got some thoughts or suggestions for the podcast, you can reach out to me too through the email, lifesworthlivingfoundation@gmail.com, or 435-277-0235. Call and leave me a message. Let's chat back. I will respond to anybody that calls. And again, I really appreciate you, Michelle, because this is a subject I've not really touched on, and so I do appreciate you being willing to share it. So thank you again. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Appreciate you.